Good afternoon. My name is Brenda Tyndall. I am Executive Director of the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture, where our mission is to foster curiosity and a spirit of discovery in visitors of all ages, enhancing public understanding of and appreciation for the natural world, science, and human cultures. This mission in mind, I am delighted to welcome you to tonight's lecture, Reconstructing Queen Amanishakheto's Musical Instruments, sponsored by the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East. We are delighted to have Dr. Suzanne Gonseca with us tonight, who will discuss her research on the double reed pipes known as alloy, found in the pyramid of Nubian Queen Amenishikheto, and what they reveal about the connections between Nubia and the Mediterranean world. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit questions anytime during the program, and our speaker will address as many as time allows at the end of the presentation. It is now my pleasure to introduce Peter Dermanwelian, Barber Bell Professor of Egyptology at Harvard University and Director of the Harvard Museum of the Ancient Near East, who will introduce our speaker.
We are delighted to have our speaker tonight, and I'm showing some fall leaves of New England behind me, hoping to entice her back to this side of the country. Susanna Gonseca is head of antiquities conservation at the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. She holds a certificate in archaeological conservation from the Römisch-Germanisches Zentralmuseum in Mainz in 1987, and was objects conservator at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston right here from 1990 to 2016. And since in another life I used to work at the MFA, I can attest to the amazing work she did on countless Egyptian and Nubian objects. Her move to LA was a great win for the Getty, but a huge loss for Boston. But nevertheless, she remains a project member here for the Alloy of Merowe, a European Research Council grant project with Stefan Hagel of the Austrian Academy of Sciences. She's worked as site conservator in Egypt and Sudan, and taught conservation at, get this list, at the MFA, MIT, Harvard Extension School, the Metals Conservation Summer Institute, Higgins Armory Museum, and the Metal Processing Institute at WPI in Worcester, the American Research Center in Egypt, and even the Central Asian Museum Conservators Training Program in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. So she gets around. She served as chair of the publication committee of the American Institute for Conservation from 2005 to 2010, and she's currently associate editor of the Journal of the American Institute for Conservation. Her research interests include materials and manufacturing techniques of ancient and historic metalwork, and the intersection of traditional craftsmanship and conservation. And she's a member of CASTING, that stands for Copper Alloy Sculpture Techniques and History, an international interdisciplinary group. In 2016, she received an individual grant for fieldwork on metal preservation in Nepal, the Asian Cultural Council, New York. And she co-authored with Ivan Markowitz, Looking at Jewelry, LA, the Getty Museum, 2019. So we are very lucky to have her join us tonight to enlighten us on some of the music coming out of ancient Nubia. Susanna, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for your kind and generous introduction. And for the fall leaves, I wish I was there with you. Thanks to the Harvard Museums of Science and Culture program for inviting me and for the support in setting up this lecture. And let me share my screen. Last but not least, a warm welcome from a foggy, chilly Southern California to all of you in the audience. Dear invisible participants, for joining us today. I am thrilled to be able to present to you the fruits of an international collaboration of an ongoing project by partners from the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Austrian Academy of Science, Middlesex University, and me at the J. Paul Getty Museum, reconstructing Queen Amanishakheto's musical instruments. And you won't believe this, I cannot. Let us begin with a visit to the Sudan, to the site of Merowe, which is a place of breathtaking beauty, located about 125 miles north of Khartoum in the northern Sudan. The region was home to the royal city of Meroe, one of the capitals of the Kingdom of Kush, which lasted from roughly the 8th century BC to the 4th century AD. During the earlier Napatan period in the 8th century, the Kushites ruled over Egypt as the 25th dynasty. After that period, they retreated to the region of Napata near Jebel Barkal, north of Meroe, and a few centuries later, the capital moved to Meroe, with the royal city located close to the Nile. What you see here is the royal cemetery located further out in the desert, and what we will want to look at is this pyramid of Queen Amani Shaketo. Here, the earliest view we have of this monument by Frédéric Caillot, a French explorer of the 19th century. His engraving of 1821 shows the monument in its almost preserved full beauty, despite a crack and the missing top. Kushite pyramids are steeper and smaller than the Old Kingdom pyramids of Egypt that many of you are familiar with. This one was estimated to be 28 meters tall. They also appear not to have been fully pointed, but perhaps had a small platform at the top. The burial chamber was located underground, as we will see shortly, not inside the pyramid. And note the small building here, the offering chapel, with a pylon for the entrance, decorated with reliefs on the interior and exterior. Here we see Queen Amani Shaketo inside the funerary chapel, in a small shrine, receiving offerings, funerary rites. She ruled from 10 BC for about a decade, shortly after a peace treaty had been signed between Rome under Emperor Augustus and Nubia. She is wearing her finest, crowned, heavily bejeweled in this majestic portrait. She exudes power down to her manicured pointy nails and royal regalia. Note the necklaces, layers of necklaces, earrings, and the stacked armlets. Her treasure actually was found, even though not through an excavation, but by a treasure hunter, Giuseppe Ferlini, an Italian doctor and traveler, who came to Nubia in 1830 and found the treasure, the cache of gold jewelry that belonged to the burial of this queen. There's still some dispute where he actually located the material, but he tore down the pyramid in the process. Known as the Gold of Meroe, this collection of jewelry is now divided between museums in Berlin and Munich, to which he sold the cache. The jewelry is quite well preserved, as you see, with exquisite surviving enamel and showing a melding of Egyptian, Meroitic, and Hellenistic motifs. You see here a winged goddess, an Egyptian motif, the ram-headed symbol in the middle of this shield ring, which is a unique Meroitic creation. And again, here, the image of the pyramid, 1821, and then not much is left in this image of the 1960s after Ferlini's explorations. A new chapter began for the Queen's burial in 1921 when the Harvard University Museum of Fine Arts expedition began work at the site. The expedition was established in 1905 when George Andrew Reisner became the MFA's curator of Egyptian art, as well as Harvard's professor of Egyptology. Over a period from more than 35 years, the expedition worked at sites, more than 20 sites from the north of Egypt, from Giza near Cairo, I don't know my little pointer here, Middle Egypt, and then in particular in Nubia and Kerma at Jebel Barkal, El Kuru, Nuri, and in Meroe. And he was one of the leading archaeologists of the day who employed photography widely. From his work over the decades, we have wonderful archival material, beautiful images, and here's one of the workmen busily excavating at Meroe in the northern cemetery. Here, the pyramid in an elevation. You see up here the stump of, well, the what would have been the pyramid, the small offering chapel that we saw in the image, and the burial chamber underground, reachable through a staircase. And this dark mass here is called a door block. It would have blocked the entrance into the burial chamber. Nonetheless, the tomb was plundered, probably in antiquity, like almost all burials in Nubia, and of course many in Sudan. But at the door block, Reisner found something extraordinary. It was described in the excavation diary as bone tubes encased in bronze plate. And a quote, and another quote, these have holes and may have been a flute. Well, obviously not just a flute, a bunch of flutes with the image here in situ. We only have 2 black and white images from this, the discovery of this cache, but we have to clean up some terminology. We really should not be using in this circumstance the flute word, as we were instructed by our curators of musical instruments. The pipes that we will examine in the time that is left were the principal wind instruments or reed pipes from antiquity, referred to as auloi by the Greeks and tibia in the Roman world. They consist of 2 separate pipes played simultaneously using double reeds. It's a process that requires great skill and dexterity. You see a beautiful mosaic with auloi in the Archaeological Museum in Naples, and here a vase drawing. The tubes, the resonators of the instruments could have been made from bone, wood, or encased with metal, as we see. You see these slender bulbous parts. These are bulbs which held the reeds that are held by the mouth of the musician. Once you open your eyes to auloi, which happened to me, I did not know much about them before I started working on this project, you see them everywhere throughout centuries and many different cultural contexts. Here, examples from the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, with an Etruscan painted terracotta panel from a tomb, a small bronze sculpture of an Eros from the Hellenistic period, a Greek silver ring, another Eros from the 4th century BC, and a Greek vase. In the Egyptian Roman context of Amani Shaketo, we know that Ptolemy XII was also called Auletes due to his love for music and drink, known to be playing the flute at Dionysian festivals. Drawing closer to Nubia, Herodotus reported that in the 5th century BC, the Ethiopians, as Cushites were referred to by the Greeks, worshipped Dionysus. You see an image of Dionysus here, zipping likely fermented drink from a cantharos, and on the right, a bronze head of Dionysus excavated at Meroe, where Amani Shaketo's burial is located. This bronze head is one of a pair. This one is at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and its twin is in Khartoum. The royal baths, which were part of the royal city of Meroe, closer to the river, were a very luxurious place with pools, water pools, gardens, richly decorated with wall paintings and extraordinary sculpture. You see here the excavator George Garstung from the University of Liverpool in the process of the excavation. Some surprising finds were made there. A small amount of bits and pieces of auloi and a sculpture of an Auletes. Now in the Petrie Museum in London, was holding in his hands these 2 yellow rods, damaged, but these are remnants of an auloi. In 2013, the visiting committee of the Department of Musical Instruments provided funding for a conservator in objects conservation at the Museum of Fine Arts to focus on the preservation of these excavated pipes. And I was lucky, fortunate, so honored that this project was handed to me, and I spent about 3 years on and off, not full-time. You can't do that kind of work full-time, exploring the fragments, and I'll take you into a deeper dive. Again, this is what was excavated. And as I said, there are some small diary entries and 2 images, but we had no further information. And what I was presented was this situation. 14 wooden trays with bits and pieces. And I think there are only 11 here in case anybody is counting. But there were 14 trays, which would make you to believe that 14 pipes were removed and placed, each one in a tray. That would have been very nice for us. And maybe that was the case originally. These are the boxes in which the material traveled from Meroe overland through the desert on, I don't know, trucks, trains, to northern Egypt, and then on a steamer across the Atlantic. So imagine what these little bits have been through. You see down in the larger trays here, the original cotton wrapping, the raw cotton, raw fabric, and then many little notes of the excavators, some in Arabic. But in Boston, over decades, some sorting took place, some housekeeping. People separated bone from bronze, which, of course, for us trying to reconstruct the instruments became a little bit of a headache. If you go to the Museum of Fine Arts website and you look up the aulo, you find the image that is in the center here. This is not an image of any actual pipes. These are some of the better preserved, more interesting pieces in a pleasing visual arrangement. It has nothing to do what the instruments look like, but it's a good example to show you what we're dealing with. So the resonators consist of thin bronze tubes, of which you see here many sections. They were connected by interior wooden or bone tubing. And there's a little stump that sticks out here, which would have been inserted into the adjacent little tube. So these overall, many of them were constructed of small little bits of tubes connected by interior organic lining. There are a few pieces with extraordinary long tubes. These are the bone bulbs, which held little funnels, which ended up in this location by the photographer's choice, but they would have set up here and held the reeds. And of course, reeds are made for performances. They're replaced frequently. The most extraordinary feature are what you see here enlarged, the ends of slider mechanisms. This long metal tube is one of 4 sliders which would go up and down the tubes in order to close air holes and change the pitch. Here's an air hole, and here is the plate that would close this hole going up and down in the process of playing. It doesn't have a square plate. It has a tiny sculpture of a dolphin and holding a seashell in its snout. So you see here the seashell. This is the big head of the dolphin with the flippers and its back tail. This is a second dolphin seen in profile with the typical big domed dolphin head. Of course, dolphins are part of the iconography of many Hellenistic items, but unknown. This is absolutely unique in context of a musical instrument. There are some comparanda to the instruments. All of them are different, but I wanted to show you a few examples. At the top, an historic image of a larger set of tibia from Naples, the National Archaeological Museum. In the center, a more recent find of bone and bronze tubes from Slovenia. And at the bottom, a very interesting tibia at the Metropolitan Museum with little chimneys. It's just one piece, not too much is known about it, but none of these really helped us particularly in our reconstruction. The elements of the Meroe aulo were published by Nicholas Bowdley in 1946, and he included plates with black and white photographs, which for us were really important reference points. He did not crack the riddle of the pipes. He did not construct instruments, but he provided a lot of interesting observations, including a quote that a complete restoration even of a single instrument is not possible. He also believed that the instruments were used in the Queen's funerary rites, which may be a good hypothesis. At the bottom, you see the late Maurice Byrne, who was a renowned alloy scholar from England. He came to visit the pipes repeatedly. He made plexiglass replicas. I was fortunate to meet him on a few occasions, and he certainly impressed on the musical instrument curators at the MFA how important a conservation project would be, and that may have been the seed which led to what we're doing right now. And you see the bits and pieces in their wooden shallow boxes that were created in the Sudan for transport. I can tell you when I entered this project, I was frozen in fear of disrupting any meaningful adjacencies with these boxes. What I also should mention is this material was never treated, never repaired in its 100 years since excavation. No wax was used for stabilization. Nobody tried to glue anything together. Nobody cleaned anything. So it's a perfect crime scene. It's virgin material. It's really what we like to work with. So we started with some analysis of organic materials. These are, it's a sad slide, a lot of wooden bits and pieces from the lining of the metal tubes. This wood is highly degraded and provided us a whole number of samples for radiocarbon dating. The date is 50 BC to 50 AD, which falls very nicely into the range of Amani Shaketo. And what is important is it's a contemporary instrument. It is not an heirloom. Next, we were able to send small samples to the foremost scholar of archaeological wood identification, Carolyn Cartwright, at the British Museum. And she identified on, I have to say, maybe we sent 5 samples, I can't quite remember right now, that all of them were made from European olive tree wood, which again is interesting. I mean, it's the source for the wood. It does not tell us exactly where the pipes were made, but it is an important identification. And here in this close-up view, you see this is a piece of ancient wood that lies in a bronze shell. So it's a hollowed out branch of wood with holes which corresponded to the holes in the wooden sleeve. And these are bone sockets. Something else extraordinary. And again, you know, you're dealing with forensic science. Maybe not everybody gets as excited about it as we do. We found fibers. They almost look like hair on some bone sockets. So this kind of, it's bone, it's stained green by copper corrosion products. This would have been inserted into a bronze tube like here. Of course, these are different scales, but in order to tighten the join between the bronze and the wood, thin layers of fibers were used, like plumbers do today. Some bronze tubes, I forgot to tell you something. The mechanism of opening and closing the sound holes and changing the melody of the instruments is, except for the 4 dolphin sliders, accomplished by turning double tubes. So in many instances, these bronzes are double tubes. Here you see a hole, and the outer tubes have little tiny bronze knobs, which probably were used by fingers to turn the holes back and forth. And we'll see more of that later. But in many of these little soldered on knobs, we found tufts of hair. Well, it's actually twisted thread. And textile conservator Joel Thompson at the MFA prepared slides. Here's a view in polarized microscopy, and she was able to clearly identify these fibers as flax, as related to linen is made out of flax fibers. She said these were extremely fine as the finest fibers she ever saw in Egyptian ancient garments. There's some analysis that we have not been able to complete. We really want to confirm if the use is indeed for the organic white material, if it's bone or ivory. Sometimes it can be hard visually to distinguish on degraded material. I'll show you a second image where I can point you to clues why we think it is bone. Analysis is getting more and more sophisticated, and these days there's a technique called peptide mass fingerprinting that can identify proteins and the animal origin of egg white coatings on photographs. And it is actually an analytical technique that's used in the food industry to distinguish between animal compounds, sheep, cow, goat. So if it worked on our pieces, we would be able to tell you from what kind of species of animals the bones originate. But in this case, the bone is highly degraded and also infiltrated by copper corrosion products. And those seem to be really hampering the identification. We're working with Dan Kirby, who is in Massachusetts, who's done bone and ivory identification for many museums, also for objects in the J. Paul Getty Museum collection. So hopefully we'll have another chance, take more samples. Something else very curious are plugs of the red soil. This is the color of the earth, the loose sand and the dunes in Meroe. And some of them were compacted, found like little dense cylinders in the reed holders. They could almost suggest intentional plugging. Well, we would like to figure out if there is a binding media, but this is work that remains to be done. We investigated the metal, and one of the first questions that came to mind is, how were these long, thin tubes created? And naively, even though I am a metal worker, I assume, oh, they must have beaten out metal and joined it by soldering. And these are radiographs of boxes with various tube sections. No solder seams at all. That baffled me. And I should point out, you see some vertical lines here. These are artifacts of the digital radiography plate. Just focus on the white tubes, as with radiographs of the human body, the bones, the more radio opaque parts are white, and whatever is thinner shows up darker. So here the holes are pointed out, or here the tube is broken off, and these are just islands. These gray islands are single wall bronze. What is interesting is that the tubes are joined very tightly, airtight fitting, as you want to have it for instruments, musical instruments. Here, we'll look at that again. The flare, some of the tubes, bottom ends were hammered out to flare slightly. And as the metal stretches, it gets thinner. And lo and behold, this area is grayer, thinner. So interesting. Then we saw something else that we still have not been able to solve. Many sleeves have little cuts. And here as well. So the shorter sections and the outer rotating sleeves had cuts. They must have had a mechanical importance, which we have yet to identify. Well, I'll show you an element in close-up of multiple tubes. And again, you can see an outer tube with an inner tube that fits just perfectly. Beautiful knob with a little decoration. And this is what the piece looks like in real life. Obscured by soil and corrosion products, you can hardly see it. So that's the benefit of the radiography. It allows us to see things much more clearly. Here is an image of a beautiful short double tube. So these are two very thin bronze tubes, corroded, stuck together by corrosion products. What looks like a half moon is actually the two holes that have slid past each other. So the lighter half moon is the inner tube, and then the outer hole slid over it, and that's why you have this image. I hope I say that fairly clearly. And this is a cross-section. Well, it's a photograph of the edge. The red scale is 1 millimeter. So look at this. This is 1/4 of a millimeter. It's absolutely extraordinary. It's fine mechanics on the highest level of sophistication. How were these tubes made? Well, they were, I believe, cast and lathe turned. And we know lathe turning was used by Romans. I just think many people didn't know on what level of the sophistication, I'm looking for another word. You see here a bone bulb with a drilled hole, nice cylindrical hole. What looks white here and purple here is a thin sheet of decorative silver foil, which was laid over the surface. And there's some parallel lines, which again speak to lathe turning. So we certainly learned something new about Roman technology here. We sacrificed a little piece of bronze, did a cross section, looked at the elemental composition. This was done by Richard Newman, head of scientific research at the Museum of Fine Arts. And it is a copper alloy of about 90% copper, 10% tin, and very, very low amounts of lead. We did some further surface analysis using X-ray fluorescence, which is a technique that provides an elemental composition of a spot by surface analysis. It does not really provide a quantitative alloy composition, but it gives some pointers. So here again, what I called silver foil on the bone tube, that is silver with a small amount of lead, which indicates the source of the silver. And then some areas where these little knobs were soldered onto bronze tubes, lower level of copper was tin and lead. So it was a soft solder that melted at lower temperature. Lead tin solder, it corroded heavily, and many of the solder joints opened up due to corrosion over 2,000 years of burial. Now, after we knew all of this, let's make some tubes. What I was able to do over about 1.5 years is go through these wooden trays, document the bits, and glue as many together as I could with a conservation grade reversible adhesive. For any of the conservators in the audience, it's our beloved P72. Some elements begged to be joined. Here are 4 broken bone bits, which came together in less than a minute. Some other pieces took more time, but you would be surprised how feasible it was to join many longer pieces. So I ended up with, a nice assortment of respectable tubes, but I could not make instruments. I could not take this project further. So in 2015, a group of renowned music archaeologists joined our project. Stefan Hagel from Vienna, Olga Zubkowska, who was doing her PhD in Berlin, and Peter Holmes from the UK, who is a retired mechanical engineer, a trumpet player, an instrument builder, who also made reconstructions of famous instruments such as the silver trumpet of King Tutankhamun. We joined forces and tried to put more bits together. So we used this photograph, and we're able, with a lot of arguments, to join fragments that really matched what was shown in the photograph. It's not that easy. I cannot tell you how many arguments we had matching each grain of corrosion. This round patch here, for example, was really helpful. Unfortunately, of the 2 photographs, there are only short sections of tubes exposed. So altogether, it helped to create distinct sections, but it didn't help to create the whole instruments. Based on the experience of the music archaeologists and previous studies they carried out at a group of tubes in Naples, they started to do something that makes a lot of sense, measuring the inner and outer diameter of these tubes and grouping them by diameter. Of course, these instruments had to, these tubes had to fit together. Then, based on Stefan Hagel's extensive experience as a classicist and scholar of Greek music, he laid down some ground rules for restoring pipes. There has to be a sensible musical scale with resonant intervals, coinciding notes, and there has to be a relation to ancient texts. There has to be a meaningful pitch that can be created based on the whole location, and it needs to make overall musical sense in relation to ancient musical documents. He uses computer programs to model scales, and here are two of the Meroë pipes, the wooden short pipes with their whole locations. And the light yellow image shows you different 15 scales of systems of ancient musical annotation with their respective names. So these are all these caterpillars or alloy or tibia with their whole locations. The blue area are Roman imperial scales. The yellow area is a Hellenistic scales, and you see where the Meroë pipes fit right at that intersection. And forgive me for being naive in the way I explain it. It is outside my expertise. In 2018, Stefan was awarded a European Research Council grant, which is a very prestigious research grant given for many disciplines over for long multi-year projects. And the scope of this project is to explore relations between Hellenistic music as pervaded in theaters and concert halls throughout and beyond the Roman Empire and Near Eastern traditions, and through study and reconstruction of wind instruments of the Hellenistic pedigree found outside the confines of the Hellenistic homeland, may provide evidence of another or foreign tonality that was employed in these regions, specifically in the royal city of Meroë in Sudan, but also on a large alloy find that originates from the Oxus Temple in modern Tajikistan. So the alloy were really used very, very widespread in the ancient world. And with Meroë at the crossroads of trades and a center of power, was obviously also a center of globalized musical culture. So what we continue to do under the umbrella of this grant is continue sorting and connecting the fragments, continued conservation, joining material analysis, precise documentation, 3D modeling based on very simple photogrammetry, anticipated completion of the pipes, creation of playable replicas, a comprehensive scientific publication, and perhaps an exhibition that, of course, has to be coordinated by the Museum of Fine Arts at some point. Some fun images of documentation. Here is a minute, it's about 2 centimeters, a very delicate but richly decorated bronze chimney. There are 3 of them, I think, in this cache, and you see Peter's beautiful engineering drawings. We were able to create an inventory of all significant short tube sections with tiny accession numbers. We have a huge database with all the images, with Bodley's description, with our inventory numbers, Bodley's numbers, location and pipes. I know this is rather nerdy, but it's the only way to herd this group of tubes and herding cats, I have to say. As I said, Stefan's computer models allow hypothetical movements. So these are pipe drafts of pipe configurations, but you can move these elements in the computer program around and calculate what it would do to the music. Here's a draft image, a beauty shot of a almost complete set of pipes. Using the simple photogrammetry and measurements, some 3D printing of pipes was possible, because the ones here, they're still just tubes lying next to each other. We don't want to glue them together. There still is too much uncertainty, so we can't handle them and get a tangible sense of the instruments, but 3D prints allow that. So that is a very, very nice aspect. And this is where we left the project in August 2019, the last time our group was together in Boston. We have now 12 individual pipes forming 6 instruments of double pipes. And we have very original names for them. We call them the long pipes for obvious reasons. These are the ones with the sliders and the little dolphin endings, dolphin sculptures. These are unique in size and scale, in every aspect, and very difficult to play because they are so enormously long. There are the short pipes, which are really complicated with many of the turning sleeves in which we found the little fibers, and they are high-pitched, complex, according to Stefan. And then the wooden pipes, the simplest, called wooden pipes because the interior lining was predominantly wood. Very few rotating sleeves. Also unique in that they don't have bulbs at their ends as far as we can tell today. So these groups are sleeping at the Museum of Fine Arts and waiting for us to come back. Based on these complex drawings, replication instruments have been done. And as I said, Peter, Olga, and Stefan sharpened their skills on other alloy groups before. So there here some draft examples. And here is the first recreation of the simplest, the so-called wooden pipes in brass made by Peter Holmes. Here lying next to the ancient instruments. And here they are on view, and probably a number of you saw them on display at the Museum of Fine Arts in the special exhibition Ancient Nubia Now, exactly 2 years ago. That was certainly a high point for the project. And just imagine once they all come together. The project has a blog on the website of the MFA under conservation projects. The outlook, as I said before, we hope to return to continue piecing the pipes together, gathering enough information for a final publication, and then we'll see what where the pipes will go next. Many colleagues at different museums, scholars, analytical laboratories helped us in the process. At some point, I just want to point out Raj Gupta from a hospital, God, I'm blanking on the name right now. We took the pipes late at night to a CT scanner. They are hoping to be able to image them, but the resolution wasn't high enough for the delicacy of these thin-walled metal instruments. And I'll leave you with this gorgeous image of the pyramid field in Meroe, where in the ancient days lions roamed. Thank you very much for joining me, allowing me to present this project to you. You're probably curious to know, what did these pipes sound like? We don't have sound of the Meroe pipes yet, but Diana will play you a recording of Stefan Hagel playing another Hellenistic alloy reproduction.
That was magnificent, Susanna. Thank you. And so wonderful to actually hear the sound at the end there. You can just imagine those tones wafting over the Marawi Desert and the pyramid fields there, and wonder if Reisner and Ashton Sanborn and Lyman Story and others who work down there were thinking about these kinds of romantic tones. Wonderful presentation. Thank you.